succeed at this time in history, we too will encounter a series of no's. The great American poet Wallace Stevens in the last century, he was a businessman, became a poet. One of his lines was this: after the last no comes a yes. And on that yes, the future world depends. Do not be discouraged when you hear the political system say no. Do not be discouraged when the coal companies and the oil companies say no. Don't be discouraged when people who are deniers, I can't even, denialists, whatever they want to be called, when they say no. We can overcome this resistance, but again, it is going to take everything we've got. And since everything is at stake, it is justified to give it everything we got. Let me tell you, we ought to feel a sense of joy, really and truly, that we are alive at a moment in history when we have the privilege of joining with one another in a great cause, the stakes of which have never been higher, the outcome of which is foreordained because it is a just outcome. We ought to feel happy that we can turn our energies toward this struggle. Let's move from this place onward to Paris and through Paris and beyond. Make sure your voices are heard. Win the conversation. In all those prior movements, conversations mattered, like the ones with my friends, like the ones outside that pizza line. Don't be dissuaded if some denier says, I don't want to talk about it. Sometimes it's like that movie with a dysfunctional family and an alcoholic father who flies into a rage if the word alcohol is mentioned. Some people, you mention the word climate, they just fly into a rage. And some people decide to keep the peace by never even talking about the gorilla in the middle of the room. Don't let that happen to you. Speak up. Don't be violent. Don't be harsh. Don't be cruel. Be persistent. Be persuasive. The facts are on your side. The truth is on your side. We are going to win. Now, finally, imagine a future time when your kids look back on this moment on the Sanford campus and they're coming of age. They will ask one of two questions back of us in this day and time, depending upon the circumstances in which they find the world they inherit from us. If they live in a world with hundreds of millions of climate refugees, with governance failing, with sea levels rising and coastal cities abandoned and tropical diseases moving northward and stronger storms and deeper droughts and all of the horrors the scientists have tried to warn us about, they would be justified in looking back at us in this day and time and asking, what were you thinking? How could you not have acted? Was it too hard? Were you watching Dancing with the Stars? What was the deal? But if they live in the world we are determined to leave to them, if they live in a world where hundreds of millions of new jobs are being created in making buildings climate friendly, in making agriculture and forestry sustainable, installing solar panels and windmills and making businesses efficient and reducing the global warming pollution and creating hope for the future. And if they can look at their kids and know in their hearts that their lives are going to be better still, I want them to look back at us and ask, how did you find the moral courage to rise up and do what many said was impossible? How did you find the courage to act? The answer to that question is going to be, in part, the students of Stanford University came together and said, yes, we must, we can, and we will. Always remember, political will is a renewable resource. Thank you.
For years, we've been told that climate change is this huge problem with a simple solution: change your light bulbs, drive less. I think common sense told us it was going to take a lot more than that. We were set up to think that we were the bad guys.
The fossil fuel companies have in their reserves 5 times as much carbon as would be necessary to take us past 2 degrees. If they carry out their business plan, planet tanks.
We know who the villain is, and we know what they care about: their money and their reputation. So if we're going to win, that's what we're going after. By divesting from the fossil fuel industry, we're taking a moral stand against these companies.
It's unconscionable for our educational institution to fund climate change.
But it's not just moral, it's strategy. We're not just changing light bulbs, we're changing paradigms, changing the world. What started as a few campuses less than a year ago is now more than 300 in the US alone. And it's global. Europe, Australia, and beyond. Churches, cities, and states are joining in the movement to divest from fossil fuels. What's most exciting is the collaboration and the community power that these campaigns are building. And people are paying attention.
The more money that we take out of these fossil fuel resources, the more money that we're investing in alternative energy sources.
We've seen what the fossil fuel industry can do with the billions we've invested in them. Imagine what we could do if we invested that money in us.
In all, 67 foundations with $50 billion in assets have pledged to divest over the next 5 years. Advising those foundations was Divest Invest Philanthropy. Its director, Jenna Nicholas, joins me now. Welcome. So explain to our viewers what exactly it means to divest.
So what it means to divest is, and we're seeing this with endowments and individuals that are coming on board to do this, is to remove one's holdings from fossil fuel companies. So there's an initiative called the Carbon Tracker 200. So many institutions and individuals are starting with the Carbon Tracker 200, the 200 of the worst fossil fuel companies in the world, and then many are going much further. So this is coal, oil, gas. And then what we're doing is paralleling this divest side with the invest side. And this is investing in clean energy solutions, whether it's energy efficiency, renewable energy, agriculture, water purification technology, and such like.
Well, let's focus on the divest side for a moment. Is the goal here to incur economic cost on the companies you're divesting from, or just shame?
Well, a big part of it, and a big motivation for a number of the individuals and endowments that are coming on board here, is really this case that's being made around stranded assets, which is really that there's an overvaluation of the price of these fossil fuel companies. And that really, if we were to burn all of the fossil fuels in the world, that the impact that that would have on temperature rises is so much that it doesn't make sense from a financial perspective to continue to invest. So a big part of it is the financial case that's being made for divestment. And another part of it is that shaming piece, and to really try to put pressure on the fossil fuel companies to invest in research and development for alternatives and to really move in another direction for the future.
We have seen divestment campaigns involving apartheid in South Africa, the tobacco companies, and looking back on them now, it's unclear whether they didn't kill those industries, they didn't stop those industries from producing those products. But in the case of apartheid, we're talking about freedom. In the case of tobacco, we're talking about health. What are we talking about here? What is the immediate benefit?
Well, a number of things, and just on that point about making the parallel to apartheid South Africa, it's been really powerful. And today at our press announcement, Desmond Tutu has been spoken out, really drawing the parallels between divesting from apartheid South Africa and divesting from fossil fuels, and he's been a great spokesperson for the Divest Invest campaign. And really, a big part of it in terms of here is that it's both the climate justice perspective, but also social justice, economic justice, and really seeing the interconnectedness of all of the issues that arise. This isn't just an environmental campaign, but really seeing the ramifications that this has at a systemic level across the whole of society. And so it not really being just about environmental justice, but really the systems that play it at large. And so a big part of this is saying that business as usual is no longer the way that we can be operating moving forward.
And like you.
You step into an elevator and someone asks, what's going on with humans and global warming? How would you explain that in a few floors?
Yeah. This is very, the global warming from our CO2 is physics. We put up 40,000 pounds of CO2 per person per year in the US, 20 tons in round numbers. And the physics behind that causing warming are the same physics that the Air Force used to put sensors on heat-seeking missiles. And in some really fundamental sense, if you deny the global warming effect of our CO2, you are claiming the Air Force doesn't know what to put on their heat-seeking missiles. It's absurd.
It was an honor to be in there.
Well, no, thank you.
It is time to change the profit incentive by demanding legal liability for unsustainable environmental practices. Encourage governments to stop accepting funding from the fossil fuel industry. Such funds erode government's responsibilities as managing custodians of our world. Divest from fossil fuels and invest in a clean energy future benefiting the world's majority. It is no longer acceptable for any of us to seek to profit from systems and industries that threaten our values. Move your money out of the problem and into solutions.
There are a couple of important themes that have emerged across the whole series of reports. One is a growing confidence about the reality of climate change and the role of humans in causing it. A second is a much sharper picture of the consequences of the changes that have already occurred and the changes that are likely to occur in the future. And the third, and I think that's probably the kind of capstone achievement of the Working Group 2 report to be released in a couple of weeks, is that we now have a much better way to integrate thinking about impacts of climate change with all of the other things that are happening in society. Societal responses in terms of dealing with climate change have taken a pathway that was really not what we expected, and in particular emissions of heat-trapping gases have grown more rapidly than we had anticipated, with the consequence that the total forcing of climate change is evolving very rapidly, more rapidly than more or less the full range of possible projections that the IPCC has considered. Other things that have been surprises, though, is how sensitive the world is to extreme events, and Hurricane Sandy in the Northeast was a perfect example of the amount of damage that can be caused as a result of unfortunate confluence of a series of different factors that make the impact of a relatively modest storm really, really serious. The way I think about it is that it's not so much of crossing a threshold into irreversibility as it is the longer we wait, the more complicated things get, the more expensive it gets, and the more residual damages we end up dealing with. There are almost certainly tipping points in the function of the Earth system. There is, for example, some level of warming at which we are committed to total melting of the Greenland ice sheet. The amount of ice on Greenland represents something between about 20 and 25 feet of sea level equivalent. So if all that ice melts, sea level rises by more than 20 feet. A really substantial impact that would occur over some hundreds of years. But whether that tipping point is at 2 Fahrenheit, 3 Fahrenheit, 4 Fahrenheit, we really don't know.
Is a professor of civil and environmental engineering, as well as the director of the Atmosphere Energy Program at Stanford University. Coincidentally, that's where I got my start. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mark Jacobson. Mark? It's so nice to have you here, and I promised the audience a minute ago that they would be thanking me, and what they're going to be thanking me for is we hear so much dire information with regard to the climate, the planet, and climate change and global warming. Tonight, you have something that is positive that you could present to all Americans.
Yes, Dave, we're developing science-based plans to eliminate global warming, air pollution, including the 2.5 to 4 million deaths that occur worldwide due to air pollution each year.
Due to air pollution? That many people are dying because of air pollution?
Prematurely, including 50 to 100,000 in the United States each year, and also provide energy stability and energy price stability for a long time to come.
Okay, now let's get to the good part. How do we accomplish that?
Well, so the science-based plans we're developing, they involve converting the current energy infrastructure, which is based primarily on fossil fuels, to one derived completely from what we call wind, water, and solar power for all purposes.
Right. I believe the statement that caught my attention from you was there is enough wind to be harnessed, enough solar power to be generated, wave technology, hydroelectric technology to power the entire world.
Yeah, primarily wind and solar. There's enough wind to power the entire world for all purposes, around 7 times over. And this is over land, there's enough wind. And solar about 30 times over in high solar locations worldwide.
Now, I mentioned this to former President Bill Clinton, and he said, yes, that's true, but unfortunately, where the wind blows most consistently and stronger are places where there are fewer people. So you have to get that power to the people. Is that an encumbrance?
In some cases, yes. Like there's a huge amount of resource. The Great Plains of the U.S. is referred to as the Saudi Arabia of wind. It's got one of the hugest wind resources in the world. But there are a lot of people who live there, but still you'd have to transmit it to the coast. But I should say that the offshore, the east coast of the U.S. is the largest untapped resource of wind energy in the world.
And they are starting to develop that area now, aren't they?
There's been a lot of talk. There are a lot of proposals in many states along the coast, but there hasn't been a wind farm put up.
Now let me ask you this. How do we then expect or get or motivate the fossil fuel people, the gas and oil people of this country, to stop what they're doing. All right, thanks, guys. We've had enough. You can turn your Shell station into a Yankee Candle store. I mean, they're not going to give up this multi-billion-dollar industry.
They aren't, and that's correct. So we really do need policies put in place that right now the fossil fuel industry gets a lot of subsidy. The wind and solar also get subsidies, but not quite so much in aggregate. But policies need to be shifted towards wind, solar, geothermal, electric cars. It's also not only just for electricity we're looking at, for transportation, heating and cooling, and industrial processes. So this has to be done at the policy level.
So now and this is kind of a bit of a challenge then. You're throwing down sort of a challenge because you have a plan, and I don't hear many other plans, and perhaps there are other plans, but you have a plan saying we can take care of this. Now it needs to be run through the administration, run through Congress, run through Senate, run through the President's office. And as we know, the last several years, nothing happens there. Yeah. So how do we facilitate this? This is, by the way, this is expensive too, isn't it?
It's not expensive. I'll get to that in a second. But first, we've done plans at a world level, we've done it at the U.S. level, now we've done it at individual state levels. And so certainly at the U.S. level and the world level, it's much more difficult to implement. But we think at the state level...
But you have gone state to state with a proposal for each state.
Well, so far we've developed plans for New York State and California. We're working on Washington State, but we actually have planned for 50 plans for 50 states.
Okay, let's take New York, for example. What would it take to convert New York?
So New York, for all purposes, and again, this is electricity, transportation, heating and cooling, and industrial processes. We'd power it 50% with wind, 38% with solar, about 5.5% hydroelectric, most of which is existing, almost all of it is existing, and about 5-6% geothermal, and a slight amount of tidal wave. And so that would involve about 15,000 wind turbines. Most of those are offshore. 80% of those are offshore wind turbines, and 20% are onshore. And then there are a bunch of solar photovoltaics, which are rooftop-type solar that could also be in power plants, and then sort of normal geothermal plants.
Now, what does this cost the citizens of New York State?
Well, if you look over the life of the devices, the cost of the energy would be similar or less than what we're paying today. Let me give you an example. If you take the 10 states in the United States with the greatest fraction of their energy from wind, the cost of energy during the last 10 years went up 3 cents a kilowatt hour in those states. All the other states, which are relied more on fossil fuels, went up 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Hawaii went up 17 cents a kilowatt hour during that same period because the rising cost of fossil fuels, the transport of the fuels, the mining, everything else. The fuel cost of solar and wind is zero. It just has higher capital costs, but zero fuel costs. Whereas fossil fuels, they have slightly lower capital costs, but they have higher and growing fuel costs that are going to increase in time.
Mm-hmm. Let's just say that we get all 50 states under this program, and we give it a shot. And by the way, even if we give it a shot, it's likely that we're so far behind the curve here that this is a drop in the bucket.
Well, it turns out that last year in the United States, 50% of all new electric power was wind plus solar. In Europe, it was a 68%, almost 70%. So it is growing, but we need it if we want to convert the entire energy infrastructure. And by the way, our plan is to convert it 100% by 2050 with about 80 to 85% by 2030. You need, by 2020, to have 100% of a new electricity, all new vehicles, everything else to be wind, water, solar.
What would be your elevator pitch to explain human-caused global warming? Imagine you get in an elevator.
Yeah, sure. No, I know what an elevator pitch is. I've met Elton Sherwin, who's the man who invented that phrase. Oh, really? Yeah, it's simple. It's basic physics and chemistry. It's physics and chemistry that we have known since the 19th century. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. That means that it's relatively transparent to visible light, but relatively opaque to infrared. Or make it even simpler, light comes in, heat gets trapped. So if you put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, more heat gets trapped. And sooner or later, the Earth has to warm up. That's basic physics, and there isn't really any other possibility. And if you read the work that scientists were writing, say back in the 1950s and even 40s and 30s when they first started worrying about this, this is what almost all of them said. Almost all of them said, well, we don't know for sure when this will happen, but sooner or later.
Researchers say increasingly large amounts of CO2 are accumulating in the atmosphere. They fear the Earth will gradually become warmer, causing as yet uncertain but possibly disruptive changes in the Earth's climate 50 to 70 years from now.
The Earth has got to warm up. And guess what? That sooner or later has passed, right? And here we are.
Nelson Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it is done."
気候変動問題は解決が不可能だと言われています。
许多人告诉我们，要让100万人脱离贫穷是不可能的。
يعتقد الجميع أنه من المستحيل تحويل الشمس والرياح مصدر الطاقة الرئيسي.
Ngayon, ang mga kabataan sa buong mundo ay nakilahok para gawing posible ang imposible.
Tenemos el poder de conectar a través de fronteras.
Över kulturer, i religion.
יש לנו את הכוח להפיל דיקטטורות.
Utmana företag.
Y creando soluciones.
Jednoczymy siły.
Rejoins-nous pour créer un mouvement.
شاركوا في حركتنا. Nós estamos no unindo.
我们会站在一起.
เราจะมาร่วมกัน
वो कहेंगे कि ये जलवायु परिवर्तन को सुलझाना नामुमकिन है.
אנחנו כאן להגיד לכם, זה תמיד נראה בלתי אפשרי, עד שזה קורה.
The biggest risks to economic stability around the world, according to the Governor of the Bank of England. Mark Carney, speaking in London tonight, warned that the time to act was finite and shrinking. Let's join our business editor, Kamal Ahmed, in the City of London.
Well, Hugh, yes, Mark Carney came here to the heart of the City of London to give this rather remarkable warning on climate change. Certainly unusual for a central bank governor, and I think pretty unique for the Bank of England. He gave the example of extreme weather events which he said could come together and actually put at risk global financial stability. Hurricane Sandy, the superstorm that hit New York in 2012 and caused £37 billion worth of damage. In a sharp warning on the effects of climate change, Mark Carney said tonight that such extreme weather events could become more common. At a speech in central London, the Governor of the Bank of England said the impact on the world economy could be profound.
The combination of the weight of scientific evidence and the dynamics of the financial system suggest that in the fullness of time, climate change will threaten financial resilience and longer-term prosperity. While there's still time to act, the window is finite and is closing.
I met the Governor earlier and asked him if climate change posed the greatest risk to world economic stability.
Sitting here today, is it the biggest risk today? No, it's not. Is it the biggest risk in the future? One of the biggest risks in the future? Yes. And so the challenge is how, and the challenge is that if there's not action today or in the near future, that risk in the medium term goes up and up and up. And it requires sharper action, more abrupt action, and a bigger hit to the economy and obviously to financial stability.
Mark Carney used this dinner of banking and insurance leaders in the City of London for his stark warning on climate change. The question is, how much impact will global warming have on economies around the world and in the UK?
Predicting the future economic impact of climate change is a difficult task. The UN's top climate scientists say that a 2.5-degree rise in global temperatures could affect economic output by anything between 0.2%, not much, or a more significant 2%. As for Britain, the government has warned of the risks from climate change to the UK's huge and globally connected financial and business sectors. There are risks within the UK as well, such as flooding, which the government estimates could be costing between £2 and £12 billion a year by the end of the century. For the City, this is all about simple economics.
He's making a business case here. This isn't about the environment, it's not about polar bears, it's about businesses understanding the risks from climate change and also understanding what the policy landscape's going to look like so they don't get caught out.
That policy landscape, particularly for fossil fuel industries, is likely to change in December with the Paris Climate Summit. Mr. Carney will want the question of financial stability high on the agenda. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.